like
I love
I've never felt like that I couldn't do anything because of them. But then I came to America, and then and and I at first I thought it was a racial thing rather than a gender thing. But like professionally, it's like even in design, I felt everything that those scientists felt, like all of the stuff that they talk about. I think any professional woman experiences that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like it's
Yeah.
compounded. Like I grew up like on the East Coast, and I feel like typical I mean, I grew up in Jersey City, which has like a very large Filipino community. But when I went to college, I feel like what it meant to even be like Asian American like changed. I feel like what people pictured when they see like Asian American scientists is like typically like Chinese or like
Mm-hmm.
Japanese students.
Yeah.
And then yeah, like me being there, I just kind of felt like now I didn't know where I belonged. Like so it's like like I'm a woman, I'm Asian, but I don't fit into like the
Right.
larger Asian American like story in a way. It's very weird. I feel like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, when I started grad school, I think there was a person a year younger than me. And apparently he didn't want to like meet me because Asians are submissive, whatever. And I'm like, have you met
Whoa.
me?
Uh,
I mean, my friends are like, he clearly hasn't met you then, Rose.
Or any Asian in
Yeah, I was
sense,
like,
actually.
please. But yeah, no, that movie was so triggering. Just so many memories. It's insane. But yeah, I feel the whole like matriarch thing too in the Philippines. A lot of my aunts are the, I don't know what you would call it. Yeah, matriarchs pretty much. It's like they are the ones organizing the family and whatever.
Ah,
But I've also felt, so my family and I did like this road trip from California to Las Vegas. And I was like, yeah, I'll drive it. I'll drive one of the vans with like a family. And like my other cousin who was a guy drove it too. And they're like, are you okay? Will you be okay with that? What about like, just let Mike drive? I'm like, I'm fully capable of driving. It's fine. But
yeah,
there's,
that's the thing. Like women in my family, the older generation at least, they don't know how to drive.
yeah, but it's like it's the whole idea of, oh, are you sure? Can you handle that? Can you handle like carrying that bag? I'm like, I'm fine.
Yeah.
that's so
Okay,
gross.
y'all. So I'm gonna cut you because we only have 1 minute left. I'm gonna admit everyone, and then we'll start live streaming in Facebook. If that's
Sounds good.
Yes.
Sounds great.
okay.
Are we good to go?
Sorry, still loading with the live.
Okay. Yeah, let me know when to start.
Yes. I'm gonna.
I can see everyone now. Hi guys and girls.
I think you could start now. I'll add the live stream.
Awesome. Welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming and joining us tonight. And also thank you for watching the movie, buying your tickets. And as you all may know, tonight is the first night of AFSA's anniversary event. So congratulations, AFSA, for reaching 1 year. And tonight we're going to be discussing the film Picture a Scientist. So hopefully you guys are able to watch it and view it. But before we begin, I also just wanted to quickly thank the documentation committee for setting this up. So Rhea, who I think will join us later tonight, she made this all possible for us to watch. So thank you, Rhea, and Priscilla for recommending the movie. And also, I wanted to thank the anniversary event committee for setting up the entire event coming this weekend. So you guys know who you are. And then I'm going to let our co-hosts for tonight introduce themselves and their organizations. So we're joined by 3 other organizations tonight. Whoever wants to start. Rose, did you want to go?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Rose de Guzman. I am also a member of AFSA, but tonight I'll be representing Women in Neuroscience, in which I'm a founder of. And Women in Neuroscience is pretty much, or at least this movie, Picture a Scientist, is a big why for why we created Women in Neuroscience. So it is a community to provide a positive environment and also a source of resources for women in neuroscience at all career stages. So from high school, community college, to faculty and also women who have families. And our vision is to cultivate a culture where members feel safe, seen, heard, and respected through increased community and networking opportunities and mentors for women in neuroscience at all career stages. And really grateful for the invitation to co-host this screening. So thank you, APSA.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ingrid Paredes. I'm here on behalf of March for Science New York City. For those of you who might not be familiar, March for Science is a global movement that started in 2017, and what we stand for is protecting and advocating for evidence-based policies, which I think if anyone was tuning into the debate right before this, you might realize how much is at stake and why we need to do this work. In the city, we're particularly focused on bridging like STEM outreach with social justice work. So we act as a kind of like a connection group between academic institutions, research groups, and then local activist organizations in New York City. So really happy to be here, and yeah, thanks AFSA for hosting.
And I guess I'm last. So hi everyone, my name is Sheena. I'm also part of AFSA, but I suppose tonight I'm also representing CFAM, so the Council of Young Filipinx Americans in Medicine. So this group in particular, like our mission is to provide a professional and social platform for the leadership development of young Filipino American physicians and trainees, promote the medical education pipeline, and partner with the Filipino American community to eliminate health disparities that specifically impact like our community here. And so essentially, like if any of you are also pre-med or thinking of like going to med school, essentially, you know, please like, you know, reach out and like look forward to some of our upcoming events this year. Like maybe like towards the end of this discussion, like we can provide the like the social media platforms and stuff. But I'm also like really glad for the invitation. So thank you so much, AFSA, for the invite to this event.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming and joining us. So tonight we're going to talk about, again, the Picture a Scientist film. And this film was was started because of this MIT, or it's the NES, maybe the MIT report in the 90s that exposed this gender inequity. And in uncovering this, the creators realized that the problems that were happening back then still persisted today. And there were also many accounts from many women that had experienced this inequity. So yeah, we'll start with some of the discussion points. And I think, Rose, you can start with the first discussion question we had, if you wanted to.
Yeah, definitely. I want to recognize that this movie was probably brought up a lot of emotions. I know it did for me. I was just kind of like screaming at the TV. I was like, yes, yes, that happened. Or, oh my gosh, like so many like triggering moments. So our first question is, how did you feel after watching the film? And this is very open-ended. And you can go ahead and unmute yourself. This is pretty informal.
I low-key feel discouraged to pursue science because I'm like, I know that this is happening, but like hearing it firsthand, like official with data from different sources, it's just,
Yeah, definitely. What was the part of the movie that made you feel that way?
I guess that it feels like it's inevitable, like everyone will have this experience, like at some point in your life.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone else felt that way or felt something opposite?
I felt the same way, actually, because I've been thinking a lot about, pursuing academia and going and just continuing with it. So I'm in my PhD program now. I'm a graduate student. I'm in my early years. And so there's a lot more to come. There's a long way to go. And so it's discouraging to see, in many steps of the way, there could be problems. There could be, like just feeling down. And yeah, it does make you feel not want to continue. But hopefully that changes, and I hope to see more representation to kind of encourage me, because I think if I see more people that look like me in science, that I would kind of really go for it. But yeah.
Yeah, I relate to that. I feel like I have the same sentiments. Like for me, I feel like it never gets easier to like hear these stories. Like even if it's not surprising anymore, it's still like really triggering and just like troubling to know that this is still happening. And like something that really hit me with the movie is just like every time like we see these studies come out, it's just like it's so frustrating because in one way I'm like very glad that we have this data because we can use it to justify why these initiatives, why these conversations are important. But at the same time, it's like, why were the like lived experience of these women like not enough to like justify action? And it's just like frustrating, I think, because it's like, yeah, it's like little things from like maybe like inappropriate comments from a lab mate who doesn't know how to act, or all the way to like structural things that just like add up. And it's just like the fact that we still have to be having this conversation, and not to say that I'm not glad that we have a space to do that, but just the fact that we have to have it is just like so like I just wanted to do science, but now it's like I have to solve all these other issues just to justify being here.
Yes, I love that you said that. Like, I just want to be here. I just want to do science, and that's why I'm here. But then you have to do all of these other things that are necessary, and it's so tiring. Like, it didn't leave me discouraged, but it actually made me angry. And it was my why of creating Women in Neuroscience was to like balance out and like fight this gender equality. But yeah, it definitely angered me, and it also fired me up as well. And I wonder if there are other people here who felt fired up after and was like, all right, let's do something about this.
I will say though, like, seeing like what happened in the film and like hearing about like all of the lived experiences of all the women that were interviewed for the film, I was, like, I am glad that, if anything, like, I was so disgusted and appalled that these types of things were allowed to happen, like, in their time. Because in a way, I guess it was like, I'm kind of just glad because you can see the progress that has been made since, like, the MIT study in 1999, like 20 years later, I'm not worried about some, like, renowned researcher coming to the lab and, like, touching my breast and, like, asking me how my research is going. You know what I mean? It's like, so in a way, I'm like, I'm obviously still discussing, and there's still a long way to go for, like, proper equality. But I think it's also important to recognize how far, like, at the very least, like, it has moved from, like, their time and, like, just their impact in, like, our lives today. Like, like, look at the people, like, on the screen right now. It's just like, it's so powerful that, like, there are so many women in science here, just, like, in this tiny bubble right now. So maybe that's, like, opposite of, like, everyone else's reaction, but I guess, like, just looking at it from, like, a different angle, that's how I felt about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you want to move on to the next question, Celine?
Yeah, sure. Let's move on. I'll ask this. So the title, Picture a Scientist, and they mentioned this in the movie too. Like, if you picture a scientist, you see all men. But is this true for everyone else? Because I don't think it was true for me. I think when I picture a scientist, and I actually did this once, we had a workshop a couple of years ago, and I was drawing a storyboard. And at that time we were drawing, like, cartoons for, like, a clinic, because we were coming up with, like, a solution for, like, doctors in the clinic, and I drew a picture, and a guy came up to me and he goes, "Oh yeah, doctors can be women too." And I was like, oh, I wasn't, like, trying to make a statement, but, like, yeah, they can be. But I always just believe that I had, powerful women around me all the time, and so it was never really weird to me to see that. But was that true for everyone else? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I had similar. I think we were talking about it a bit before the call, right? About how, like, in our culture, like, there's this idea of, like, the matriarchy and the idea that, like, science is an accessible career that isn't so gendered, at least, like perspective wise as kids. I don't think I started to it, but I do think that it started to shift for me. Like, growing up, I definitely, like, always aspired to, like, have a career in science, but then whether or not it was viable started to change when I started to actually see, like, who is in science. So I think that's, like, when the shift started to happen to me, like, a lot later.
Anyone else? Okay.
I can respond. I think, like, a lot of my early education with science has been, like, a lot of my science teachers have been women, and, like, a lot of the people around me who have been interested in science have been girls instead of boys, and, like, I think that has contributed to, like, I don't know, like, a more even in, like, academics, like, tend to view things as, like, I don't know, maybe more women centric than it really is, but, like, I don't know. I think I've spent a lot of time, like, as someone who has had a lot of trouble with gender and, like, trying to, like, settle with that idea. I've spent a lot of time detaching a lot of gendered ideas, and I think, like, I've come decently far in that. So I think when it comes to, like, envisioning a scientist, I don't it's weird because I feel like I don't even picture people anymore. So I don't know. Yeah.
That's a great point. Yeah. And I mentioned that there were a lot of women around my experience too growing up. But now that I'm in college and I'm in engineering, all of my professors are men, actually. I only had maybe 3 women professors in across, like, different subjects, like math, science, So it's kind of changed drastically, but yeah, it's true. Like I've never really like seen, or maybe I haven't really paid attention to like gender inequity as much as maybe I should. But yeah, yeah, it's a good point. I think slowly we're getting to see that, um, these gender biases are, um, something that we can overcome, and we can try to get better at every time. Yeah.
I have one small thing to add. I don't think I introduced myself. I'm Alyssa. I work with Ingrid at March for Science. This is a really great discussion. I was really pleasantly surprised last summer. Actually, I was teaching third graders with the New York Academy of Sciences, various science things at a summer camp. And one of the first activities they wanted us to do was this draw scientist activity. And I was like actually really worried, because I was like worried they were all going to draw like a crazy haired white man. But actually, I think only 1 or 2 of them did, like out of 30, and most of them actually drew themselves as being a scientist, and especially a lot of the girls drew girl scientists that were themselves, and like actually really creative things. Like, I mean, they were calling chemists in their chemicals and beakers potions, so that was cute. And then the other cute thing was one girl was drawing herself as a scientist who like was creating new hair dyes, and like so even had like this like feminine, I guess, aspect to her science to do what she was interested in doing with science. So that was really encouraging to me to see like this very young generation of third graders drawing scientists of all different backgrounds, and boy and girl, like everybody was a scientist. So it was really good to see.
I think they kind of mentioned that in the film, that like we are filling up the pipeline. Like we're not like wrong on that. There are a lot of kids who are open to this and women exploring science fields, but like down the line, down the road, that's where the problem is.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Even in my grad I guess cohort, 6 of us entered and only 1 was a male. But even after that, like there are so many issues of, oh, well, academia or something like this. It's like, it's too competitive, it's too cutthroat and whatnot. And there just isn't much support for women in academia. Even starting a family is tough. Like that's a conversation I'm having right now. I'm like, when am I gonna have a family? I don't know, because postdoc is a time when I need to like really be the most badass I can possibly be with publications, but being pregnant is kind of like makes that harder. And so there's just so many more aspects that women have to deal with in order to be as competitive as possible.
Yeah, that reminds me of this like terrible comment I got. I definitely agree with the list, and I think it goes back to Sheena's point too, that like the culture, especially among like younger students, is definitely changing and like towards like thinking about science in a more diverse way. But yeah, there's just all these structural limitations that still exist that just like we just like cut women and out of these programs. Like when I was an undergrad, I also studied engineering. I was told literally like that I should not apply for grad school if I wanted to have a family. Like I had to pick whether I wanted to have a successful career or if I wanted to have children and like raise a family. And I was like, this was a conversation that someone felt they could have with me like at lunch at work. And I was just like, why are we talking about this first of all? And I was like, it's not your business, like what I do outside of the realm of the pilot plan. I was just like, this has no bearing on like my capabilities. But then they were just like, yeah, just so you know, like when they evaluate your tenure clock, that's the first thing they're going to be thinking about when they see you. I was just like, huh. But I mean, I'm here. But like, yeah, I feel like it's always like in the back of my mind still, like the way that this, like, yeah, like the way that people might evaluate me just based off of that.
Yeah, I think the pregnancy thing and raising families is like I mean, obviously, yeah, it could cause you to have like a lot of time being put into that, not in your work, but I mean, it doesn't mean you can't do it, obviously. But it's surprising that there's some like scientists or like actually like my mentor is, I would not say sexist for the most part. I've never experienced anything from him, but I've heard from older people who've worked in the lab who've had been postdocs and maybe had a baby or something like this, that actually the tune kind of changed when they did have a baby, and he seemed to be much more strict on them about making sure their work was done and the hours they were keeping and stuff like this. So it's really hard to like navigate things as a woman, because if you're a woman but at least you're like doing things in line with somebody's vision of like what you should be as a scientist, it's like, oh, okay, things are okay. But as soon as you start to like try to deviate outside of that like strict structure they might have set, then problems come up, which obviously is still a huge problem.
I had a little thing to add to that. Hi, I'm Tiara. Sorry I joined late. I'm also here with March for Science, and I know this event through Ingrid also. But thank you. The thing about like what I've seen, so I joined a lab that was, when I joined my lab, my professor had only started it like that year. And she started the lab with two other, at the same time as like two other male professors. And we saw that like one of them was already like married and with kids, but then the other person was like exactly the same age as her. And within like a few years of them setting up their labs, like he got married, started having a child, and like she's just now going up for tenure this year, and she timed her baby to like she had her tenure seminar like 2 weeks ago, and her baby is due like in December of this year. But it's like that kind of just like mental gymnastics and like planning of like your life around the things that like as a woman you have to deal with, stuff like this that like that male professor didn't have to deal with, his wife having a kid the same way that she did, or she's going to have to.
Yeah, it's a great point to bring up. It's harder because women are expected to take care and, to start families. And it's not the same conversation they have with male professors. So we can move on to the next topic. Sheena, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. So the next question that we have for everyone is, did anything surprise you about the film? And why or why not? I guess like just for me right off the bat, the biggest thing that like surprised me the most when I watched this film was that it was that guy that showed up during it was like Jane's wedding, and then he shows up as like this friend, and he mentions that like, oh yeah, I went to like Antarctica with her. And I think it was like Jane's nephew who was like, oh, you were the one with her? Like you were there, when she was getting like just horribly abused by her, by her advisor. And, just him saying like, oh, I had no idea that happened. And like only then realizing the impact that all of that, I guess, taunting had on Jane. Like that just shocked me so much. Like, how can you not realize like just the impact that like calling this poor girl like a whore and a slut and like blowing ash in her face and pushing her down mountains? Like, how do you not realize that like this would be like so shitty for her? So I think it was just so surprising that like, like this atrocious behavior was allowed to happen, but also that like, everyone around her was like just letting it happen and not realizing like how this was impacting this poor person. So yeah, that was, I think, the biggest surprise for me. Did anyone else like feel any, or like was anything else shocking for anyone else?
I would second what you just said, Sheena, but like to add on to that, I think that like the part when, what was his name, Alex, when he was talking about it, he said that he didn't step up because she looked like she was okay, that it didn't bother her. And I was just kind of like it blew my mind, because when you see injustices in the world, you don't think about whether or not someone is bothered by it or whether or not they look like it. It's whether or not it was a bad thing to do and you need to stand up for someone else, you know, like the fact that like that was kind of the flow in his head to think on like whether or not he should act on it was really discouraging in a way, because it's like this is really what a lot of men think about when they see injustices happen to women. Like this is why they're bystanders, because women are so good at making it look like nothing bothers us. And that's like that I think is one of the biggest problems of allyship, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. That was definitely the most surprising part for me. And yeah, mind blown. Like, dude, what are you doing? Like, of course, all this was horrible. But I'm really happy they put it in there, because hopefully there are men watching this and they will see that, and maybe it'll be a wake up call to them, and they'll find a character, well, not a character, a person in this film to be like, I guess, relatable, and they'll see like, oh, this person like had this like conversion of thought, like maybe I should do that too, instead of if it was all just the women, like a lot of us, all the women would like, you know, like feel what they're feeling. But for a man, I think it's probably really important that they put that story in there in his conversion of thought, so then it'll help somebody else to wake up and realize like just because they're literally brushing the dust out of their eyes doesn't mean that they're okay.
Yeah, that's a great point. You don't wait for someone to complain or to come up to you and say, "Oh, this was, you know, this was happen. This is what's happening. You know, help me." You have to kind of recognize what's wrong and right, and step up. And that's what I think the movie was also trying to say, is to not be the bystander and to work, and you know, kind of sometimes being uncomfortable is, you know, what it takes to come up to your advisor and say, hey, you know, that was not cool. Like, we got to do better here. And in that way, you're also, you know, you're also a role model to others around you, and people will start doing the same.
Right. And like, you know, just to add on to that, like, I guess, like, it's important, like, to not just be a bystander, but I guess just, you know, the times were so different like 20 years ago. And I think, you know, what if the culture was just that and that was the norm, you know? So like, you know, I guess like it's like a peer influence thing, right? Like if this is just the normal culture of like the institution, then it's hard to say that like, oh, like this is wrong. Like the way that we're treating this like individual is like completely wrong. And I think, you know, I'm glad that like we're progressing towards like more equality, and like we're able to recognize that you know, people should be treated equally. Like, you know, what does gender or, you know, sexual orientation or racial background have anything to do with the quality of science that we put out? Absolutely nothing. So yeah, just wanted to like add on to Celine's point.
Yes, Rose. Yeah, go ahead, Rose.
I wanted to add on to that, in that with all of these bystander effect, like there's also just the implicit bias, and it can come from anyone, even if you don't think that you are doing any of these like biases toward other, you know, women or anyone else really, even toward like men. But yeah, the example of just changing the first name to either, I think it was Jennifer or John, and how that already had an effect, and it wasn't limited to just male professors or yeah, just male professors in general. It was just with everybody. And so I think it's the implicit bias that humans have in general that is really what's shocking to me. But I am really glad that in 2020 that implicit bias is being talked about even more now and openly. And I think that's really important. But it is really something to think about, like checking in with yourself and why am I reacting this way toward this person? Is it because X, Y, and Z? And what is it about my own biases that's making me react this way, and then alter my reaction accordingly.
Oh my God, Rose, it's funny that you mentioned like that exact part in the movie, because I literally had that in my notes as something that did not surprise me about the movie. It's like, it's so terrible. And like, you know, something that I might mention later on again is, you know, maybe a way to combat like this kind of implicit bias is just to have like blind interviews, like just don't look at the name and just have like their credentials out, you know, as a way to like not, like, because if you see the name, like, you know, like you just said, like if it's female, like we think differently versus if it's male. So maybe that could be like something that we can do to like combat implicit biases in this way.
I'd like to add a little something. Hello, everyone. I'm Priscilla. I'm from AFSA. One thing that did not surprise me, actually, is that there was like one person of color that they interviewed, you know? Like you can even see like the last scene, I think one of the last scenes, you know, like the women, like the white women that wrote the MIT report, they were having like a toast, you know, like, oh, yay, you know, all the, talking about all the progress that they've done. But at the same time, you know, they've done a lot of progress for white women, for sure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same for minorities. Like it reminded me about this book that I read. I was reading just this summer, like Hood Feminism. I don't know if you've heard of that book, but it's this African American woman. She's talking about the differences of what feminism is for white women compared to minorities. Like yes, white women are fighting for, you know, equal pay and equal, you know, salaries and all that stuff, but from the very beginning, like minorities don't even get a say, like they don't even get paid, or they don't even have a seat at the table to say that we also need to get paid, you know, like they don't have that space to voice that, oh, we're not actually getting paid, you know, that meme that like, oh, you guys are getting paid, that it just reminds me about there's so much work that has been done, and the progress is amazing, like throughout the years, and all the, you know, the data, the evidence that have shown that yes, there's bias in terms of gender, but at the same time, there's even more bias if you think about intersectionality and all the different identities that we have, especially with, you know, systemic racism and then all the things that are happening. In our world right now. So that's one thing that I thought, like, you know, they just have that one token African American woman to talk about her experience, but at the same time that doesn't encompass everyone's, you know, like all the people of color's experiences in academia in STEM fields. So it's just one that I wasn't surprised, like, oh yeah, of course they have that that one token person of color.
I totally agree. Like when I saw the flyer, I was like, wait, what? Why are there like 3 white people in like in this film? And even with the one person of color, I think they also interviewed the president, and she was also of color. But I was like, wait, she doesn't even look. I had to like zoom in and like look her up to see what even like what ethnicity she was. But yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's also another important thing about like all these organizations that we're a part of, is that increasing representation and visibility.
Rose, did you want to continue with the discussion questions?
Yes. So how does some of your experiences shared in the film compare, or how just some of the experiences shared in the film compared to yours. I'm also really curious about all the guys that are in the conversation right now too.
The first thought I had while watching the film was that must be so difficult for colored women even more. And I remember all the Filipina scientists, and it's just it's a double it's a double suffering, if you can, if you want to call it, for colored women. And yeah, just one just one colored woman in the film. That's just I was it's not surprising indeed, but the filmmakers should have put more effort. Like, there's no Asian there. Come on. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to like compare my experiences to anything shared in the film, but like it's really weird to me because like I went to high school in Queens, and like um, the school is very diverse, even like with its professors and with its students, and like they had a really strong backing for like uh, girls who wanted to pursue STEM. And like coming to college, like I still go to like I go to the city college, so it's still a public school. It's still like very much diverse, but like it was weird to see like even today I had a class. Uh, it's like a general science class, like science but discussion based, and I guess um, so there are students in my class that are like more white than uh, who I have gone to school with before, like from I guess like I don't know, like from Staten Island or other similar places, and it was just like I think every single class, like he continues to say things that like make things that I observed to see that would make women uncomfortable, and I would talk to other people in my class and they would agree with me, and like it made things uncomfortable enough where like I was getting deeply bothered. So like I really see it like especially with the iceberg diagram, like there's a lot of small things and a lot of like implicit tones that make people really uncomfortable in a classroom setting. And it's really hard to address. Like I emailed my professor about it for not like calling them out and not like stopping that in its tracks. And like, honestly, I don't know how, like, because our professor is a woman, like I don't really know how she can really deal with it. It seems like something that's really hard to like talk about in with someone that's like so much younger than you. I don't know.
Yeah, I completely agree. Did anyone have similar experiences that were shared in the movie? I guess as a second part to this question.
For me professionally, I think that what kind of I really resonated when they were talking about the types of sexual harassment, that it's not just actual coercion, but it's all of these other microaggressions are still qualified as sexual harassment. Because in a lot of my workplaces, probably in all of them actually, I feel like it's kind of a daily thing that women go through. I'm not exactly in science. I'm an industrial designer, but industrial design is also a very male dominated field, and most of the studios that I've been in, I am the only woman in every single one of those teams, and And early on, I became one of the senior designers and even as a director of design at one point. But there was this one specific time where a past employee actually told me that I should join the meeting because they needed a woman in their room to intimidate like our potential business partners. And I was so offended, and it just kept on getting worse. Like this potential client ended up looking at my shoes and offering me designer shoes, and no one said anything, and I kind of just walked away. And like my team would always be like, oh, that was so uncomfortable. But during those moments, it isn't as if they ever did anything to be an ally. It was always like, yeah, I was really uncomfortable at that point, and I don't know, like, but like, but no one ever does anything. Eventually, I ended up leaving like that firm, and I don't know, but like when every single one of the scientists kind of talked about all of these like microaggressions and just like the constant the constant harassment that seems really little, but if you have to deal with it every day, it's really exhausting.
Yeah, I completely agree. Oh, Alyssa, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say I've had some experiences like they've had in the film. Never had anybody grab my breast, thank God, but I've definitely had shoulder touches and knee taps at meetings, and I was just like, if I was a man interviewing with you right now, I don't think you would have oddly tapped my knee. Like, why did that happen? And it's just like I shouldn't have to worry about that. And then other things like in grad school, it's been hard for me to tell when, maybe my idea wasn't thought to be a good one or my points weren't taken seriously. Was it that I was like a young grad student, or was it that I was a woman? But now as a senior grad student and seeing myself like at a more one-to-one level with some postdocs, especially like very new postdocs that just graduate from their PhD, and hopefully I'm gonna graduate soon. Well, we'll see. But anyway, there's been a few times in the past few months where we've had where maybe a few months ago I presented an idea and it was like shot down for like how to troubleshoot something, and then somebody also is having like a similar issue, and this new male postdoc says this thing to do, and literally at the meeting, like everybody's like, oh, that's a fantastic idea. And I'm like, I had that same idea before and I was told it was stupid. Like, I don't understand. It's the same idea for troubleshooting the same thing. Like, why the different reactions? So now sometimes, yeah, I'm starting to see like maybe it's not that I'm just like a young grad student. Maybe it is this sexism thing. But it's like Anna was saying, exhausting to have to like think about that and deal with it, and it just kind of like builds and boils inside of you, and it takes away from you focusing on your work, which takes a lot of time and effort. So yeah, that's definitely part of the iceberg situation.
Yeah, oh, sorry, Rose, were you gonna say
Go ahead,
something?
go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, Alyssa, like I had like very similar experience of like uncomfortable touching, but actually like not from a senior academic, but from students. Like I've seen like in the way that I present myself like in classes, like students feel much more comfortable coming to me very closely. I had a student like shoulder rub me one time, and also like ask me like out to go to like dance classes with them afterwards and stuff. And I was just like, I am your TA. I am here like to teach you. And I think it's just like, yeah, I think like something that like was like so frustrating for me like throughout the film is just, yeah, like this constant thread, which I think will keep coming back through the conversation, of just like exhaustion of like all the things that I think like cuts into our time, and like we have to think about just as a woman, like presenting ourselves like in the society that we live in, and how that extends like all those attitudes like just like are like concentrated like in the lab space or like in the classroom space. I feel like it's like super frustrating just like going to conferences and like having to wonder like if this person is talking to me for professional reasons or for other reasons, like just having to do, or like the safety of like traveling to lab like late at night or all of that. I feel like it's just, and yeah, and I think like when you guys were talking about earlier, that colleague that was just completely oblivious to what was going on. I feel like there are so many times, like thankfully, like nothing as extreme has happened to me, but just like having to, like mention, like, by the way, I am not going to take the subway at 3 a.m. to go do experiments. And then everyone's just like, why? I'm just like, like, why would I do that? But yeah, it's just like frustrating, I think, having to explain this like constantly, like these disparities between like how different colleagues are able to just like be in the lab and then how they're treated in the lab.
Yeah, for sure. I've had similar experiences at school of getting really curt emails. And I taught a class, I was like 200. And so it was like only a number, but I showed the emails to my advisor because I was the instructor. And he was like, yeah, it's because you're young and you're a woman. And I would never get emails like that. And I never have. And then really to like Anna, I was doing a team photography outing. And one of the photographers was like, so I also do boudoir photography. Would you want to be part of that? I'm like, yo, we're on the same level here. And my photos are better than yours. So no, I would not want to be photographed by you anyway. But it was just that whole, just no, we're colleagues. and just, you just see it across all industries. I am really curious about people who tune in the Philippines and what your experiences have been like, and are they different from the US or are they similar?
Hello. Hello everyone. I am Mel Salinas. I am joining from Manila, Philippines, and I'm currently working at the National Institutes of Health. And Carla, by the way, is my friend. So I just want to share my perspective of how it is to be a woman aspiring scientist here in the Philippines. So here in the Philippines, the gender bias is not really a major issue, I would say. Actually, a lot of our science leaders here are females. I can also recall that a lot of our science teachers in grade school, high school were females. So it's not really an issue here. But the the sad thing here actually is that science is kind of mired with politics and issues of hierarchy. And as the matter of fact, biomedical scientists here are quite a few, and research or science is still biased towards, or for example, granting of funds are still biased towards the medical doctors, because I don't know what is in here that they are still viewed as higher than the biomedical scientists. And so that's really the struggle of us aspiring scientists, that for example, in applying for funds or in authorships, even if these guys didn't really make that substantial contribution, they get into the they are written as the main authors or main contributors to the paper, while the research associates or research assistants who did a lot of work are most of the time or sometimes are not included as authors. So going back to the film, so I feel bad for those women who actually experienced it. And I'm just lucky, I would say, that during my master's, I actually finished my master's at the University of Delaware. And I'm lucky that I didn't experience that kind of situation. And actually, my advisor, who happened to be the institute director, was a female, and she was Asian. So I kind of feel like I have that protection of being being a fellow Asian. And one thing that I would like to maybe ask from this group is that how is it to be a Filipina in the STEM field there in the US? Maybe as a PhD student, because right now I am actually preparing for my PhD applications in the US again. So I have added another criteria, I would say, in choosing a supervisor and a university that I I would love to work in a university that fosters diversity, or maybe an advisor who is a female also. I think that would be a great criteria also. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mel, for that. Just to like answer your question as you know what it's like being a Filipina PhD student in the US. I just wanted to share one of my experiences when I was applying for a grant recently. So as many of you know, a majority of Filipinos will have like a Spanish last name, and I'm also from Canada, and I find that like science in Canada is very different from like the US as well. In that in the US there are a lot more Hispanic people, and so I was like applying for grants, and so here's the thing, like with the NIH, the NSF or whatever, NCI, Filipinos are categorized under like the East Asian umbrella, and so we're not considered a minority. But with that being said, I was like writing this grant. I showed it to my PI. He was like, okay. And then as I was like leaving his office, he literally like just jokingly just says, oh, and by the way, like you mentioned before, like people look at your last name and they think you're Spanish, right? And so my last name is Garcia, and I'm just like, I guess. And he was like, oh, well, I hope they think that you're Spanish so that, you know, you're able to get this grant. And I was just like, excuse me? Like, you know, like, so I need to be a certain race to get the money for this grant. Like, is my scientific merit not enough? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I know he was just saying that like jokingly, but I was like, that was like such a strong microaggression. I went, and then the thing is, like, then I went to talk to the postdoc that I work with, who coincidentally is also like Italian, and he was like, oh, you know, like, don't worry about it. Like, he was just joking. Like, you know, he doesn't mean anything by it. But it's like, so, you know, and I'm fully telling him just how frustrated I am, and he's just like, no, it's okay. Like, you know, he doesn't like he's not like, you know, he's not serious about that. But you know, so the culture is just like, it's a little off-putting, you know, the fact that like as Filipinos we're not seen as a minority like from like government agencies, but on top of that, like, you know, there is like that Spanish thing, and you know, like like having to pretend to be Hispanic to like get money for a science grant, like what in the world. So yeah, that's been my experience, like feeling like a minority but not actually being recognized as one.
I feel like when I taught and when I was a grad student, I put this internal pressure to try to be like as perfect as possible, just because I felt like I was representing Filipinos and women and people of color and whatnot. And so it was just always that constant pressure of like trying to be good, because for most of these people, and I was in upstate New York for grad school, for most of these people, I'm the first Filipino that they'll ever meet. And so I was like, in a way, kind of representing Filipinos. And so I was like, I have to be as perfect as possible, because I don't want to give Filipinos a bad rap or any sort of like stuff. But yeah, there's always that, just that constant pressure of just being better and faster, and just like doing things as best as possible in science. Or that might just be my internal bias, I don't know. But yeah, I think we just have that pressure of just doing more just to even be recognized.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I just wanted to also kind of add on to or answer Mel's question. So it's really important to pick a PI that you work well with. So that's a good criteria. Always look for someone that you can see yourself working on a long period of time. But yeah, my experience being a Filipina PhD student, I am probably the only Filipina in my cohort and in my department. So yeah, there is that pressure to kind of represent because they don't know a lot of Filipinos in their field. So I have to really kind of be on top of it, but also no pressure because there's very supportive people around me that have really helped. But yeah, so I think we have just a couple more minutes of discussion. I'm going to pass it to Ingrid so she can kind of ask a few more questions in our discussion. But yeah, we're nearing the end.
Sure. Yeah. So I know we've spent a lot of time talking about the issues that we've been facing and really starting to empathize with each other. But I think what really I took away from the film was how fired up I think I got. And I think because we're seeing a lot of cultural change, hopefully this, and I think slowly it is happening, translating into actual institutional change and policy change that can really protect women and protect other underserved groups in STEM. So curious, and I think since Shutdown STEM, which you guys might have been familiar with earlier this year, where academia took a day to also think about racial justice within our departments and academic institutions. Changes that you've seen within your own departments or within yourself, if your perspective on how to approach diversity in STEM and what your institutions or departments might be doing to better protect people from potential harassment and inequity. I can start a little bit. I can say at least that I think for my department, we're a relatively new department and we're pretty small compared to other chemical engineering departments, and we've been growing really quickly. And I think thankfully most of the faculty, if not all, have been receptive to conversations around diversity in STEM. We've been seeing a lot of these committees pop up, which I think is a start, and definitely where there should be a task force thinking about these things constantly. But we always kind of a hesitancy, where is this work going to fall, which often falls onto people of color and other underserved groups with who sit on these committees. But I do think there was a list of demands that came out from a coalition of Black students at NYU Chemistry, where pretty much they walked through a list of ways that NYU, the department, can be more equitable. And it was a list of 9 demands. I can't think of all of them on the top of my head, but some of them were procedural things make the GRE, do not require the GRE, which we all know is just this fake test that just costs a lot of money to take. And you just send, it's a whole thing. Also creating outreach requirements for students to kind of uplift that burden that I think a lot of students of color take on. And also thinking more deeply as a department, what the role is, within not just serving students, but also larger institutional and in our case, New York City culture, right? We've been having a lot of discussions around what it means to divest or what abolition is. And I think having these conversations for a department that has never had them is definitely a start. And then having a strong student force behind that has been really slowly pushing institutional change. But it's encouraging, I think. But yeah, have other departments have these initiatives sprung up over the last year, or have you guys been involved in any of them?
Ingrid, to piggyback on that NYU bandwagon, up at Langone, so I'm part of the Student Diversity Initiative here, And I know that like we recently just submitted a list of quote unquote like suggestions, or I don't want to say demands, but like recommendations to our Vice Dean of Biomedical Science. And among those include, you know, opening up like an office of diversity and inclusion, as opposed to only having one person in the entire administration responsible for like diversity, inclusion, and equity in our school. And in addition to that, I think we're also trying to convince our dean to start up a program to host like students that come from historically Black colleges, and like kind of funnel them into like maybe like a research tech position here at NYU, and which could help them like, you know, get the experience that they need to eventually pursue a PhD. Because I think like one of the biggest things that prevents you know, like people of like different backgrounds or like disadvantaged backgrounds from pursuing like higher education is like the amount of funding that, or like firstly it's like a financial thing, right? They can only afford to go to certain colleges, but then those colleges will not have the same amount of resources as other colleges. So like that's why we're trying to like convince our school to maybe like give these people like opportunities to then go into this field, and as a way, like this is like as a way to like support them to continue like pursuing higher education.
Yeah, a quick thing, bringing back to what Priscilla mentioned about earlier about like people of color. At MGH, I'm part of the OBGYN department, and I'm part of the DEI committee. And one of the things that we've talked about is this, I guess, bias toward women and pregnant women specifically, where Black and Indigenous and people of color, when they're pregnant, when they're about to give birth, their pain isn't taken as seriously. And so when they say, oh, I'm having pain, whatnot, it's not taken as seriously. And that's by like doctors and anyone taking care of them. And so there's also this increase of death of women while they're giving birth. And so what we're trying to do is trying to make it so that any patient is able to report any kind of racism or discrimination that they experience at the hospital. Because right now there's like really no one to go to. There is a patient advocacy committee, I believe, but you wouldn't even know that they exist because it's not really advertised anywhere. And so what we're trying to push for is just having a sign in each room where a patient can easily see, oh, if I'm experiencing something, I can report this easily.
Yeah, just to connect it to medicine again, as Rose was talking, for my class, I guess, or school, I'm a medical student, just to give context for that. So UW has implemented removing eGFR. So GFR is basically like a lab value that measures your like renal function. So doctors like get a lot of like a bunch of these tests, and then that's one of the numbers that they look at if your kidney's working okay. And basically, historically, like there's a separate, it's GFR and then eGFR, and then eGFR are tests that they get specifically for African Americans. Like there's a separate test just for if you're Black, like automatically they get this test. And so like why would you do that? Like why is that? Like just because they're African American doesn't make them like a different, you know, like there shouldn't be a separate test for them. Like everyone should be under this GFR, like just one standard of GFR. So that has been like one of the biggest like changes in like the whole University of Washington like medical system. It's just removing this eGFR. I don't know about like other hospitals in the United States, but I know like UW has been one of the hospitals which completely like got rid of it, because they're like it's race shouldn't be like one of the factors that you should be looking at like in treating people with end stage, you know, renal disease. That shouldn't be a factor that you should be thinking about. Everyone should be under the same standards as, you know, like white patients. They should have the same GFR kind of like formula, you know, because there's different formula. And then I think we're having a restructure of kind of just the curriculum of because every time we finish a block, we have this week of like break. It's not really like a break week, but anyway, it's just a week where we study like insurance, social determinants of health, a lot of the social, like humanistic side of medicine that's not like just directly basic science. So there's like a whole restructure. Like a lot of people, like we also had a coalition of like Black students just listing out like how come we don't learn more about like the history of medicine and then the historic kind of like the bad side of medicine, you know, like we learn about all this discovery, so we don't talk about like the big like the effects of medicine on people of color and just the different like with natives. And even in our class in the Alaska site, we only had like one lecture on Alaska Native health and medicine, you know, like, and our state is like full of Alaska Native people. Like how come there's no talk about learning about them and then, you know, getting their perspective and having them talk to us medical students who are the people that's going to be taking care of them in the future. Like how come there's no input from their side of the story? So a lot of curriculum changes, and then just restructuring, I think, is for us.
Yeah, I'm glad, Priscilla, that you brought up even like the data collection, right? That like in this film, like we talked a lot about like representation and harassment and like a lot of these like large issues, but how like these attitudes also trickle down to like how we also like have our internal biases when we actually like, collect our data. And even if representation, like we get there, like undoing this bias, like in our own work, I feel like is so important. And a whole conversation on its own about like just like tackling, yeah, like how you mentioned before, like looking at things from a really intersectional lens, like, yeah.
I have like one thing to say about diversity initiatives, and because I'm involved in one for my undergrad college, and then I also do one through my lab. So I get kind of two sides of the spectrum, but I see a common theme of like students are really motivated to talk about diversity, but they always have these teams of like people of color who are really motivated to do it, and then it's always it's on the students' back to kind of do a lot of the work. That's like one of the big things actually that we sent back to our dean was like, yeah, like a lot of the admin or in terms of recruitment actually has fallen on students in terms of diversifying my college, because I go to an honors college at a like a broader public school that doesn't reflect the diversity of New York City. Like my honors college is majority white and Asian, whereas the entire community is majority Black and brown. So there's something wrong with like the admission system just to get into the honors system, which gets you a scholarship. So it's like this weird system. But yeah, I like in the movie that suspension became a firing only with administrative backing, like the help from the dean. So in the end, you need someone, unfortunately, like in the administration or with a position of power who will back you, because it's like I find this like a big roadblock in terms of actual change. It's just like you can have all the students screaming for change, but like nothing actually happens if you don't have someone at least with the seat at the table to actually vouch for you. So it's a hard thing, but it's also like that's why representation and leadership is also really important, because it ties back to like there's always someone who understands your perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like that was so well said. And I feel like something that I've been thinking about a lot is just like that this work that a lot of us are doing, like that people of color do in further institutions, like it should be paid. It is like I said like earlier, like we are here like to do science, but then we're also here in this capacity largely doing volunteer work. And while it's important work, yeah, it often I feel like doesn't feel valued, even though these conversations are so often presented. Like, right, I think I'm sure we've all been to like diversity and inclusion events like at our institutions, and they come and go, this kind of like celebration of like how far we've come, acknowledging the problem, and then, you know, like it kind of just like goes back into its corners until like the next event comes around. So I feel like that was, yeah, really important point to make. I've seen like some institutions like in our department at least, like we've been able to get like seats on like faculty committees, which has been helpful. But then like I said, I always feel like at the end of the day, it's kind of like sending lots of emails anyway, like just following up. We said we would do this type thing. Yeah, anybody else?
If anyone else wanted to say something, we're nearing our end, and if there's any other parting thoughts, maybe something that wasn't discussed earlier that you wanted to bring up, feel free to do so now. So yeah, in the interest of time, we're gonna go ahead and talk about some upcoming events that are coming up in our orgs. So tomorrow and on Saturday, there's going to be the day 2 and 3 of our APSA anniversary event, and we would really love for you guys to come and join us. There's going to be some women professors that are going to come and talk, and it would be really great to see you guys all there. On October 27th, there's Decolonizing Science workshop by the Advocacy Committee of APSA. And then, Ingrid, did you want to talk about March for Science?
Yeah, sure. I think same vein as the Decolonizing Science workshop. On Tuesday night, we're hosting a voter information night. We're going to be talking about a lot of things, but mostly what's at stake, and particularly focusing on what happens when we lose our democracy and what effects fascism has on science and technology. And Carla, who's here tonight, will actually be speaking. We'll have a few other guests too.
And Women for Science, for Neuroscience?
Yes, so Women in Neuroscience, we have 2 series right now. One of them is called Leading Women, so Leading Women in ADHD Research. And so this series of webinar pretty much highlights women neuroscientists advancing ADHD research or Alzheimer's, or it would be leading women in neuroscience and in the arts. And so just fun stuff every month. And we're also starting a new series called Live, Ask Me Anything. How to Get into Grad School is our first, just because applications are due in December. And then next year it will be How to Survive Grad School, and so on and so forth. Pretty much trying to help as many people in women in neuroscience and really all students at different stages of their careers, starting from high school, especially community college and undergrad. And with a focus on diversity when choosing our panels so that we increase representation and visibility throughout all of our events.
Thank you, Rose. So yeah, check out these events that are coming up soon. The discussion tonight has been so nice. Thank you all for joining and listening in and sharing your thoughts. It's been really nice to talk about this movie. And again, thank you, Priscilla, for recommending it. And thank you, Rhea, for setting this all up. You guys are amazing. But yeah, if anyone else wanted to quickly say any of their thoughts, go ahead. But again, thank you all for coming. It's been really nice to see all of you come out. I know it's late for some of you, but.
Special shout out to Rhea for getting this organized and getting all the movies and making sure that the movie is advertised all over social media. She's a head of are you hiding? Documentary committee, but she's just done such a wonderful job. Thank you.
Can I follow that up? I just want to thank Rhea so much that I want to invite you guys to unmute yourself so we can all clap really loud on the recording. So let's see. Yay! Thanks, Rhea.
Thank you, Rhea.
Thanks, Rhea.
Thank you, guys. Good night and good morning to some of you.
Thank you.